I am psyched to be joined by Joe Mullinax, site manager of SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues. Joe, it's your first time in studio.
It is.
First day of summer.
It
and the
is.
first day of a new era for the Memphis Grizzlies coming off the NBA
Spring has
draft.
sprung, right?
Spring has sprung.
Summer has sprung. Memphis spring, something like that. There's something there.
Whatever, just
I'm
roll
working
with
through
it.
an article idea in my head.
Thank you for workshopping it here with us right now. I mean, just collectively coming off of last night's NBA draft, it's being seen as such a win for the Grizzlies. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's important to make sure folks understand that it's a win. They lucked into it being a win no matter what, right? Like it was going to be a win because of Ja Morant, regardless of what they did with the pick that they got from the Mike Conley trade. But now that they took that Mike Conley trade pick from the Jazz, tagged it with a 2024 second and got Brandon Clark, I mean, you want to talk about a perfect marriage defensively between him and Jaren Jackson Jr. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch those guys play. So they lucked into Ja Morant. I think they would have messed it up if they didn't take Ja Morant. But the fact that they went and now they have Brandon Clark to pair with it, who a lot of people, including me, had in their top 5 in terms of talent. He doesn't have much of an offensive game right now, which is probably why he fell. But he has a real chance of being elite defensively. He's a good pick and roll player. Him and Jaren should work really well together.
So let's start with Brandon Clark, because he is a guy that you had identified would be good for the Grizzlies to take at 23. They move up, take him at 21. What is it about his game that specifically fits so well with Jaren?
Well, one of the refreshing things about this new front office in Memphis is the fact that they really kind of emphasize the modern game, right? Obviously, you need a good lead guard. Ja Morant replaces Mike Conley in that way. You need a good modern big. You get that from Jaren. Brandon Clark is a guy who can play and defend multiple positions, and he's somebody in a pick and roll era in the league where he can switch really easily, and Jaren can too. You don't have to panic if Brandon Clark is defending Damian Lillard or if Jaren Jackson Jr. is defending LeBron James. We saw that last year. Those guys can hang with those wings. They can hang with those guards on the perimeter. They're athletic enough, plus they're able to protect the rim. Excellent blockers. Brandon Clark was a lead at that at Gonzaga. Only one player was better in terms of PER in college than Brandon Clark, and that was Zion Williamson. He went 1 overall to the Pelicans. So the fact he was there at 21, the fact that the Grizzlies had prioritized him wanting to trade up, that tells you all that you need to know. And again, it's refreshing to have a forward-thinking front office that's really emphasizing not necessarily youth, because Brandon Clark, I think, will be 23, or he is 23 already, but a player that can fit in the modern NBA, that can defend multiple positions, and can be elite at something. Brandon Clark may never be an elite offensive player, but he could almost certainly be an elite defensive player, and he could be as soon as next season.
You talk about the front office. They lucked in to job, but moving up, taking Brandon Clark certainly shows some initiative on their part. How much of this has been luck, and how much do you place on the front office and what they've been able to do so far?
I think it's important to differentiate between getting lucky and then what you do with that luck. The Mike Conley trade is a good forward-thinking trade. They had the opportunity to take Ja Morant, so that made them more comfortable to deal Mike Conley. They took the luck that they fell into, and they've turned it into a situation where almost in 6 months, if you include the trade deadline, the rebuild has been fully launched. Now you're building behind 2 hopeful future stars in Jaren and Ja. You're building behind a good, solid role player who could be more in Brandon Clark. And you have the pieces in place via trades with draft picks. You have the traded player exception that's massive that they can use to get further assets. They have more flexibility now than they did 6 months ago, and that's extremely valuable for an organization that's not going to attract the LeBron Jameses of the world, the Klay Thompsons. Free agents aren't going to come storming the gates of Memphis. That's just never going to happen, no matter how competent the front office is. But you can acquire talent and keep them there by being a competent front office. And I think that we're seeing the first steps of that, and it's encouraging.
And you hope that Ja is that future face. Probably the worst kept secret of the draft, next to Zion Williamson, obviously going to the Pelicans, but we, for the most part, knew Ja was going to end up here. Zach Kleiman comes out after the draft and says that they shut down calls and they knew that Ja was their point guard of the future. Why was this such an obvious choice for the Grizzlies to make?
Well, we talked about the lead guard thing. Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, I mentioned earlier, all these teams that made it pretty far, Toronto maybe being the exception, but Kawhi Leonard was a dominant player. You have to have somebody who can be that lead guy, bringing the ball up, having the ball in your hands every play, kind of like the quarterback in the NFL or in football, and the point guard is that. And obviously you can positionless basketball, you can find ways to do it through a forward like a Kawhi Leonard, but Ja Morant can be that guy for the Grizzlies. And he also has a really distinctly Memphis story. He comes from a small place in South Carolina, under-recruited, committed to Murray State. You know, it comes out that South Carolina offered him later, and he says, no, thank you. I'm going to Murray State because they were with me first. And there's just so many interesting things to his story. Outside of Zion Williamson, the guy who has the best chance to become a superstar is Ja Morant. And again, like we just talked about, you're not getting that through free agency in Memphis. You do it through trades. Obviously, Zach Randolph, not necessarily a superstar, but in Memphis he was. Got him via trade. Marc Gasol you got via trade. And now through the draft, you have Ja Morant, you have Jaren Jackson Jr., these are guys that if you show that you can build around them, they will most likely stay because you're developing them in Memphis. It's not like they're looking for brighter lights or they're used to a bigger situation. You're looking for guys who have made themselves what they are. That's another good thing with Brandon Clark. Transferred from, I believe it was San Jose State, goes from there to Gonzaga, sits out a year, develops. Both Ja and Brandon are guys that kind of found their footing and made themselves what they were, using their athleticism, but also showing the capacity to develop. And that should be another reason Grizzlies fans should be excited.
So you enter this new wave of guys. Right. This week also marked the exit of Mike Conley and finally officially the end of the grit and grind era that really has been ending for quite some time now.
Can we just put that to rest?
Yeah, can it be over? And can we agree that we don't need a new, kitschy rhyme to describe the future of the Grizzlies?
I think that we can agree that it's just going to be fun to watch them run up and down the floor, and it's going to be fun to watch Ja Morant throw lobs to Jaren and Brandon. That's
and how great is it that we're talking about words like fun and young and exciting? Like when I'm going through Twitter this morning, you see all this excitement for the Grizzlies, and that's no knock to what it was before, but what it was before had run its course. For fans here to now have something to so quickly be excited about, I mean, really, the excitement level of the Grizzlies completely flipped itself on its head in the last couple months.
It's going to be a completely different style. You know, we don't have to talk ourselves into we're in the mud, you know what I mean, and being excited about 80 to 75 wins anymore. This front office is pushing this roster into a new era of Grizzlies basketball that's going to look a lot more like the modern NBA. And that's not to say that going against the grain isn't fun. You know, I think, and again, we just said, can we put grit and grind to rest? That's not anything disrespectful to those four guys. To me, if anything, the last 2 years were disrespectful to people like Tony and Zach, who were such a vital part of that. You try to continue something that wasn't there anymore because they were no longer there. So now moving forward, you have an opportunity to truly rebuild this thing, allow this young group of guys, young head coach, young front office, to kind of take their time and establish what it means to be a Memphis Grizzlies basketball player again. And I think, again, we talk about small markets. That more than anything, what made that group of guys unique was that it was organic, it was real. They believed it, and the city believed it too. You can find that again, but you just can't force it. You have to allow it to breathe and develop, and that's going to result in bad basketball, to be honest with you. Like they're going to be
fun bad basketball.
They're going to be bad next year,
correct.
But they're going to be a ton of fun. And I think that as long as Memphians buy into that idea that, okay, we're not going to be very good, but Ja Morant throwing alley-oops to Brandon Clark, being on ESPN every other night, you know, that's going to happen. That is realistic for this team. Making the playoffs next year, not realistic. Let's get that out of your head now. But if you allow for them to be what they need to be and give them time, I think that you'll see in the next few years it will rise up again. You know, it all kind of cycles through. But you need talent to do that. The Grizzlies did that last night, and they've given themselves more opportunities to acquire more talent through the moves they've made the past few months.
With the addition of Brandon Clark, there's been some talk about what does that mean for Jonas Valanciunas.
Right.
What's your take on that?
I like Jonas a lot. I think he's good at what Jaren is not good at, especially rebounding. Screen setting, Jaren's okay, and Jonas is elite at that, and that's an important NBA skill that often goes undernoticed. I think that Jonas opting out and the drafting of Brandon Clark gives Valanciunas less leverage than he already had. If I'm Memphis, I have a set number of years and a set amount of money in my mind that I'm not going over. If Valanciunas wants that, I would let him walk because Jaren can play the 5. And I think in the long term, that's what they need to do because Brandon can play the 4. But that, again, we talk about bad basketball or being bad. Jaren's not ready to be a 5. Brandon Clark probably shouldn't be a starting 4 right away. You will be worse in the short term if you don't have Valanciunas here. Of course, he's a great player. But at the same time, in terms of long-term building, you have an opportunity to really kind of drive home the idea of modern basketball. Jonas has a very specific skill set, very much like Zach Randolph. But eventually the Grizzlies hope to make the playoffs again. So if you sign Valanciunas to a 4-year contract, and by year 3, Memphis makes the playoffs again, and you're playing the Golden State Warriors or the Portland Trail Blazers, whoever it is, and in that series, he can't play because he can't defend as well as Jaren and Brandon on the pick and roll. He can't stay with Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum or whoever the player might be. Now you've got somebody who you're paying $15 million a year sitting on your bench. That's not good use of your cap space. So I hope it's a team-friendly deal, and I think Valanciunas lost some leverage by opting out, because between the draft and the trade that they made for Brandon Clark and the fact that they've made the trade for Conley, they have that traded player exception, they have more flexibility than they've ever had. They can go out and get a player from Boston or one of these places that's trying to free up cap space to be a backup center for $5 million, $6 million, taking on an additional pick to help that team. That's more attractive than having Jonas Valanciunas long term, at least in my opinion.
That trade for Conley, you now have had some time to sit on it.
Right.
Who do you think it was a bigger win for, the Grizzlies or Mike Conley and the Jazz?
Well, I know you know this. There doesn't necessarily always have to be winners and losers in trades. I think it benefited both sides. You know, the Utah Jazz are a bona fide contender to make the NBA Finals now. They were that last year without a point guard the caliber of Mike Conley. But for the Grizzlies, it fits their window. You know, Grayson Allen may or may not be a good basketball player. Memphians probably don't like that he's on the team, which is slightly...
There's been a weird amount of Memphians who have suddenly become Grayson Allen stands, which is interesting.
Well, that doesn't make a ton of sense, and then it doesn't make a ton of sense...
I appreciate the try.
Right.
Trying to allow
but it also
him to
doesn't make a ton of sense that people hate him so much.
Right.
You know, he tripped people, and it seems to be a bit of a dirty player, but remember Zach Randolph and remember the people that have come through the city.
He has the potential to fit in to the Grizzlies narrative and just the Memphis narrative in general.
The redemption narrative, right? There's been so many second chances that have been taken advantage of here in Memphis, and I think that fans need to keep that perspective with Grayson Allen. Now, he might come in and completely ruin that and try to trip somebody and throw off all the good vibes. But I do think he needs to be given a chance. But the point is, if you're basing it off of the players they got back, Jay Crowder's a fine NBA rotation player. He'll probably fill minutes. I see them trading him before the trade deadline next year. Kyle Korver may never play a minute for the Memphis Grizzlies. He has a half-guaranteed contract, and he's 38. You know, he probably doesn't want to be a part of a rebuild. He probably wants to go play with LeBron James in L.A. Grayson Allen's the best player in the trade, at least long-term, the one who will be here the longest, more than likely. If you're judging it off of that, you're probably furious. You're like, oh, my God, Mike Conley can get more than that. But that's not where the value was. The value was in the pick, number 23, that became Brandon Clark. The value's in that 2020 first-round pick with the protections that it has. It'll likely convey in 2022. And that draft is the famed double draft, potentially, where the one-and-done rule is done. So 20th pick overall in that draft would be like a late lottery pick in last night's draft, because there's going to be double the talent available. There's going to be rising high school senior or graduating high school seniors and college freshmen who are coming out who still had to go to school because of the one and done rule. So if that is indeed abolished, which the Grizzlies appear to be betting on, they'll have 2 picks in arguably the deepest draft in the last 20 years, and you're going to be paying a max contract to Jaren Jackson Jr. around that time, hopefully, if things work out. Ja Morant will be due for a max contract if things work out. So that would be 2 first-round picks that you could either flip for additional assets, bring in a player like a Mike Conley, like the Jazz did, that can give you one more piece if you're pursuing a championship, or it can be 2 young guys that you're adding to a core of Jaren and Ja and Brandon Clark that you can have under team control and cap control as you pay the young guys their first max contracts. So it gives flexibility, and I think that's the most important thing. You know, it's not sexy. You can't really sell season tickets on flex. Come watch our flexibility. It's not how it works. But what it
Put it on a poster.
Right. Watch our flexibility. Market that, Grizzlies.
There. You don't need grit and grind. You have watch our flexibility.
Yeah.
We've done it.
But I think that the important thing for folks to know is that the Memphis Grizzlies' future is much more fluid now in a good way. It's not locked in. It's not hopeless. You know, next year they're going to have a ton of cap space. Chandler Parsons comes off the books. C.J. Miles comes off the books. Between that and the traded player exception, they can do a lot of different things to make them better, both in the here and now and long term. And we didn't have that 6 months ago. So that hope should really be a good force for the Grizzlies.
And one final question for you, and we turn it to you, Joe Mullinax. You, for people who don't know, you live in Virginia.
Right.
You used to live in Memphis. You continue to manage your site from Virginia. What is it about the Grizzlies that made you or makes you continue to want to be a part of this team and be involved in its coverage?
They made Memphis home. When we first came here in 2011, I knew nothing about Memphis except Justin Timberlake, Jerry the King Lawler, and the Mississippi River and barbecue. That's all I knew. But when I moved here with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, it helped. I love sports. I'm a football coach by trade. I'm a teacher. You know, sports have been a big part of my life. And I looked up the sports that were big in Memphis, and it was right that first run of the playoffs, the upset against the Spurs. And I just fell in love. I fell in love with the way that that group of guys played, the way that the city embraced them. It was the most meaningful sports experience of my life outside of, me playing sports myself. And I still hold on to that. When I have a chance to come back like I did the past couple days and meet folks who read the blog or follow us on Twitter or whatever it might be. We had the watch party last night. That was a big success. When I get a chance to do that, it makes it worth it, and seeing young writers develop on our staff, I really enjoy that. Again, I'm a teacher, so it's really cool to have young people that have kind of gone out of GBB and had success. I still do it, and I love the Grizzlies and covering the Grizzlies because they made Memphis home for me. And, I still consider Memphis my second home. And, life takes you out of here sometimes, but I still get to digitally at least live here in Memphis. And I'm a big fan of the city itself. And I think that the city needs ambassadors. You know what I mean? Obviously, I wish I was still here, but I'm able to be out beyond this area and kind of be a good word, hopefully, for what this city represents and the pride that it takes in itself and the work that it does and the spirit and the soul of it. And that's why I still do what I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joe.
Of course.
I so appreciate
thank you.
It.
Absolutely.
And you do a great job with it.
Oh, well, thank you.
And
I appreciate that. Yeah, flexibility. The era of flexibility.
We're into it. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.